Last session of the day after yesterday's party, or last night's party, and probably a long day for you. So I want to thank you all for coming out here. That's great. Great turn up. The session is about, the session title, Get Social. It's good for you. You can explain the session title in two ways. So I'd like to hear from you. What do you think, what does this title mean for you? Anyone? What do you think when you see this title, Get Social?
Probably a better way to collaborate.
Okay.
It's more rather than just being static, say, we share documents, it's more about into documents, collaboration of the collaboration around that. So
Collaboration, so about becoming social.
yeah.
Okay. Is there another meaning to this title, perhaps?
Around interaction.
Sorry?
Around interaction.
Interaction, it's also becoming social. You could always also see it as get it. So if you understand what social is about, you probably know what to do with it, right? So that's what I'm also going for in this session. Because what I found in the current SharePoint version, there might be some room for improvement. I don't think Microsoft really gets it yet. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. This is me. Difficult name, Bert van der Steeg. I usually introduce myself as Bert. I tried introducing myself as BJ once, but I got some chuckles, so I won't do that anymore. I'm an independent consultant in Holland, also doing a little bit of training. I'm working with one of the vendors of social software whose name shall be unmentioned, at least until the end of the session. I won't bother you with that, but if you're curious to know who it is, you can come up to me afterwards. So I'm doing social software, social business implementations, and also recently I set up a SharePoint competence center or center of excellence for one of the government organizations in the Netherlands. So that's what I'm doing. I try to figure out what sort of audience or how you're sitting here, with what background you're sitting here. I try to remember when I did some exams for Microsoft for my MCP exams. There used to be these scenario questions, type of questions there, which put you in a role or described you as being, you're responsible for this and this, so now you start gathering information and this is how you do it. Or so probably this might be one of the ways you're sitting here, one of your backgrounds. Maybe not, but probably for some of you in the audience. So you've heard of this thing called social, or at least your company wants to do something with it. Now you gather your information, and now what? So when do we get started? How to do it? What is it? So that's a little bit of the background of how this presentation and this session was set up. I also learned during this week and in other conferences that any good presentation needs a show of hands at least once. That's what I think. Or at least that's what other presenters think. So I'd like to get a show of hands, so at least we can get some figures or some idea of who is implementing and or planning to implement any social related features in their environment. So this is probably about 69% or maybe 73%. Not sure. I also learned that 68% of all the percentages were made up on the spot, so that's probably what's happening here. Or to be, just to put it in a little bit of perspective. I'd like to know, in a show of hands, who is planning right now, or who is not planning at all to do anything with social? That's quite comforting, to not see any hands go up right now. That's good. Who's investigating? So not there yet, not starting, but curious as to what it can be. Okay, that's good. Who is already planning, or is in a planning phase, or is in a more advanced phase of actually rolling out this social features? Okay, that's good. So we're almost half there. Who's busy? Who's doing it right now? So if we add it all up, then we're almost 100%. So that's good. That's good. Who's saying, okay, we did it, we're done, we're finished, everything's in the can, so Excellent. So not just there yet, but working on it. Yeah. So the most of the people are busy looking at it. Actually, you could say we're never done, right? You're never there. So that's a good thing to establish. All right. So we have the show of hands. That was good. I want to look at the agenda. What we're going to talk about this next 50 minutes or so. So we'll have the what. What are we talking about? What do we mean when we talk about social business or social features or enterprise 2.0, or what does it mean? And if anything I tell you comes across as being nonsense, or you think I'm talking out of my whatever, please let me know, or please dispute it, or confront me. I'd like to make it as interactive as possible, because I only got 25 minutes of slides, basically. So we need to have a little bit of discussion. So definition, then why? Why would you do this? What's the reason behind it? What's the business goals? Or are you doing it because everyone else does it? Or are you afraid of your competition? So why are companies engaging in social business software, social networking? And then lastly, if you want to set this up, what would be the best way, or what would be preferred ways, and what are other companies doing in evolving in this new way of running a business? So that's mainly the agenda for this session. All right, so let's start with the what. Looking at social business, it's got a lot of different definitions. Some people even say social business doesn't exist. It's just bad business or good business. It's a hype. It's maybe something that a marketing company made up. Or reality is, the fact is, it's happening. So there's a lot of activity going around what social means for companies, and so it's there, and it's hard to ignore. So we have to do something with it. People are asking for it, especially new generation, younger kids are asking for it. Companies seeing the benefits. So what are we talking about here? This might be a really small definition of what social is about. So instead of email, moving away from email and doing a lot of communication in an activity stream, is that what it is? Well, maybe, but not really. It's just a really, really small part of the entire thing we're doing. Is it Facebook for the enterprise? I don't think so. Maybe that's the easy way of explaining it to users, but not really. That's not what it is. It is so much more. So I borrowed a couple of slides from one of my managers, and he kind of had an historic overview of what working was like from, let's say, beginning of last century to what we're doing now. And in the beginning, it was just hard work. People were creating stuff, building machines or building equipment, or it was most manual labor, right? So in order to make that more efficient, industrial revolution gave us a lot of improvements there. So making it more efficient for people to create stuff. Ford was one of the, of course, the classic examples for that. So making it easier and more profitable and more efficient, just creating consumer goods or machines or what have you. So during the century, we moved a little bit from, or more from, working in a physical way to working in a more intelligent or intellectual way. So knowledge workers were the new, let's say, the new blue-collar people. So it's more about knowledge instead of products, actually. That's what happened during the last part of the century. So what we're seeing now is moving away from knowledge and more in terms of sharing information about ourselves. So it's getting a lot more personal and a lot more interactive and a lot more intertwined what's going on in your daily job and also in your private life. The boundaries are getting blurry of what's work and what's private. So that also affects the way we work, because we bring all those technologies and all those techniques and tools into our daily operation, into our daily way of working. So connecting hands, connecting brains, that's the evolution of the way people work. And now you could say when we're implementing social software or social technologies into our daily business, it's getting more emotional. It's getting more, it's going more towards what do I want to share with you, people around you, building networks, building relationships. So that's kind of the progressive way we're going. I think love is a kind of, well, it might be a little bit strange term, but still that's what it's all about. So trusting people and building networks and sharing information. So that's the network and the connections we have there. Okay. So about definition, there's a lot of different names for social, a lot of different names around it. You could call it enterprise social networking. It's one of the terms being coined by different vendors. You could also call it Enterprise 2.0, what Mr. McAfee did a couple of years ago. You could call it the social workplace. We all know what we're talking about. This is just different names for the same principles and the same stuff happening there. Social business, maybe it doesn't even exist. That's what I'd like to tell you. What my definition is, or a sort of description is for doing social and incorporating social into the way we work, is this one. So it's working out loud, and that means a lot of stuff. It means a lot of things. So when you work out loud, the way you organize meetings is different. The way you share information is different. So it doesn't just have implications for sharing information, but also for the rest of the organization. Actually, there's a company that's traded their, let's call it the executive boardroom, just for the company restaurant. So the executives are meeting and having their board meetings just in the company restaurant because of lack of a better place. But just to show that people are invited to join in and invited to listen in, and it's as open as possible. So that's a bold move, but still that's what working out loud is all about, I think. That's one of the principles, one of the examples. Make sense so far? Yeah? No strange, no nonsense yet? That's good. Just get me a little bit of water. Did any one of you go to Simon Garfield's session this morning? So he referred to social business as a term invented by one of the marketing companies in order for them to make more money or sell you services or whatever they do. I actually use their definition of social, and I think it makes sense. It's not as commercially painted as he wants you to believe, but still, I think there's a lot of truth in this. So it's a strategic application, so there has to be a strategy, a vision, business goals. We don't just do it because we can or because someone else does it, but we do it because we want to solve business problems. We have challenges in our enterprise. The main goal, of course, is just building your business, making money, getting people to work. And the best way to do it is to have people be as productive and as happy as possible. So that's the end goal. And what you see happening is that companies are using social business or social networking technology to do that kind of work. So that's basically what happens. They have this list of what we call the 10 tenets, sort of description of what a social business could be all about. I don't think this is a rule set of what you should do, but this is more a description of companies that are socially engaging and also very successful in building social business. This is what they do. So if you do one of these, then you're on the right way. If you do all of these, probably you do it in the perfect way. So that's a sort of guidance I'd like to give here. And if you look through the list of these 10 tenets or descriptions or what do you want to call it, and then try to think of how are we doing, what of these 10 rules are we actually using in our business or in our way of collaborating, that might be, might be a scary thought. It might be quite confronting. The first one, anyone can participate, that's really an important one. So is that something you, if you think back about your company or your organization, is that something that could happen? Is that possible at all? Anyone can participate? Any examples maybe? Nothing yet? So what would be a tool for, or what would be a method for allowing anyone to participate in any conversation? What options are you choosing, or what possibilities do you have? Discussion boards, yeah, that's a good one. Discussion boards. That's a sort of open conversation, yeah. Anyone else? Using Yammer, yeah, so activity stream, yeah, that's a good one. Wiki pages allows for a more controlled sense of content creation by more than one person or groups or whoever has permissions. My site is also, yeah, a way to share information, yeah. Sorry? Blogs, yeah. That's more of a communication or a sort of broadcast, of course, but still, yeah. So anyone can participate is a very important one, and excluding people from the conversation or allowing them to engage in any conversation happening around any topic, that's one of the main things. That's why you see companies so heavily investing on solutions that move away from email, because if you're in email, for instance, I got a question or a problem or whatever's going on, and I want to solve that problem by using email, it's a sort of a tunnel between me, the sender, and whoever I chose to be the recipient of that message. In terms of anyone can participate, it's kind of hard in email. You have to know beforehand who you're going to send that message to. And if you want other people to chime in, that's something that you have to organize, or it's kind of hard to have that self-organized. We won't go through all of these, but there's some really valuable points here. Of course, the second one is important because if it doesn't create any value, if social business doesn't create any value specifically for the users, for the end users, why would they engage in it? So the question you have to ask, or people are going to ask, is what's in it for me? How does this help me in my daily business? And how does it make work easier for me? So we'll get back to this list maybe later on, but that's some of the examples. This guy lived a long time ago, and he had this rule for, saying nothing endures but change. So whatever we know for sure is that everything will continually change. That's something that companies have to incorporate in their business, is the fact that the world around you is changing, people are changing. So that's the only thing we know for sure. One of the smaller examples was the way that we use mail. People used to look at email as disturbing because it was easier. And everyone was excited, and then afterwards people said, well, I don't get any normal mail anymore. So changing technology has an effect on people. So that's something that you have to be aware of. And this is one of the what do you call it? Quotes coming from one of the writers of one of the people from the Dekis group, Peter Kim, who wrote a blog post saying that social business is something you need to become. You need to turn around your business and become social. It's not something you buy or a service, it's something that you are. And it has implications for the rest of the organization as well. So if you are actually moving to do your board meetings in the restaurant, that's one of these small examples for that. But all right, so that's something we have to incorporate, being able to change into a social business. At the same time, we are using old values, old principles, but just applying them in new ways. So, for instance, if you think about where people get their information, how do you build knowledge, and how can people share their knowledge? What we used to do in the old days was, if I have a problem, if I have a question, I go to someone that probably can help me. Information turns into knowledge when it is being used by people, if it's being interpreted. And if you go to a trusted source, someone who you think knows exactly what he's talking about, then that information gets a bit better value for you. It gets a different angle. So that's something we are doing when we implement social business, is go into a network and find trusted sources for information and find people based on their reputation. Probably a challenge to do, because you can only see so many people in your network, but still that's a way that information turns into knowledge and into value. What does this number mean? What could this implicate? Sorry? Yeah, it's a sort of a maximum. That's correct. Yeah, this is actually Dunbar's number, and it's that's a, I think it was, I'm not sure if it still is, a British anthropologist who determined that the human mind is only capable of maintaining valuable and effective relationships with about 150 people. Those include also the people that you have met in the past and you are probably going to reacquaint yourself with if you would meet them again. So people, you can only have 150 people in your network. Probably a lot of those don't have the capacity or the knowledge to help you with your daily work. So part of that network is being populated by people you know in your personal life or football club or whatever. They're not all colleagues. That would be a sad thing if it was only colleagues, actually. So of those 150 relationships you have, a couple of them are helping you build your knowledge and build your experience and build your information that you can use. So that's just the limit of our brain. So we need extra tools to help us with finding information, sharing information, discovering what's out there. So what you see is that most of the social solutions, business solutions, consist of a couple of things. One of them is, of course, the graph, the network that we build with our colleagues and the network that we expand by using those tools. And what also happens is probably most of them have some sort of activity stream. So a place where you see information passing by. The activity stream is your source of information. And that's where the people you are following or sites, communities you're following, documents you're following, whatever, that's what's going on there. And that's what your dashboard, let's call it a dashboard, is. So that's mainly what a few of the tools, and some of them are also present in the current version of SharePoint 2013. Not everything is in there, but we'll have a look at that later. So that's a couple of the solutions. So in the end, you could say that social business and doing business in a more social way is pretty disruptive, because it completely changes the way people work and organizations are being built and whatever they can do in terms of social. So changes the way we communicate, because it's now point to point. It isn't top down anymore. Everyone can communicate with everyone, so everyone can chime into the conversation. Everyone can participate. Basically, that's what happens. The way organizations are being built, so instead of a hierarchical organization, so departments, specific groups, people create their own communities of expertise, communities of interest. So that's a big change, and the way content is being created, the way value is being created. So instead of the hierarchies, we see communities, and they create their own value and deliver value to whoever is part of that community. Social business could consist of a lot more things. We won't go into this, but of course you can expand how you're using social and how you're using these tools in different processes in different areas of your organization. So it could be in customer service, allowing other customers or customers help each other. Maybe when it's a busy area, busy time of year, there's so much knowledge amongst your customers or amongst your clients. why not use that? So that's a couple of the examples there. All right. So to the why would companies do this? And I'm not sure if the video is actually going to run that.
It's going to be claims. So just a little bit about identities in SharePoint 2013.
With every decision you make, is this good for the company?
These are basically how they're represented in
sound?
SharePoint. And if you use Office 365, you might...
Okay. Sound coming from everywhere. So this is probably not the best reason to do social. Is it good for the company? Because it doesn't. You know what this scene is coming from? Which movie?
/user
No?
or pipe user. The Windows authentication
Office
one.
Space,
So this is
yeah.
typically
Yeah,
what you'll
Space.
probably see with internal claims.
Can we turn the sound on? Oh,
You'll
that's
see
me
the
as well.
domain /user,
It's
and you'll
me.
see that W is basically indicating that it's a Windows
Wow.
authentication account. You can then have some other ones
Where
here,
am I?
and what the interesting one I think is, well, this is a Facebook one, so this is one that I set up.
That helps. Pull the cable. So Office Space, yeah, it's a brilliant movie, and a lot of good examples of how not to run a business. Strongly encourage you to watch that. So why are we doing this? Well, maybe this one. I have to get back to my presentation here. Right? So not because everyone is doing it, you should do it. Not because you can, or not because your competition does it. There has to be a business goal. There has to be a strategic application for implementing this new way of working. So what people normally like is to have some sort of valid business goal, and defining those can be a tricky question. It can be very hard to exactly define what we want to accomplish. This is a specific one, decrease market time, but maybe easier access to knowledge is not so well defined. So defining your business goals and how to turn that around and make that goals for your social implementation, that can be a challenge. Of course, if you want to measure something, then you have to start with the baseline, determine what you want to accomplish, and then measure it over time. So the more specific you can do this, the better it is for the implementation, of course. Some of them you will never be able to put into figures, because mobile workforce enablement, what is that? So if people can access your information when they're on the road, that's something you accomplish, but how do you measure that? Or how does it make them more productive? What is their production gain if they actually can do that? So it's hard to put this into figures, but still there are some specific goals that we need to set here. One of the things that also came from the book that Simon also mentioned is Social Business by Design, which two of the people from this DACIS group wrote. Companies that are doing it right can make these numbers, can make these figures. So decrease in communication cost, or increase in shorter time to market, or so there's a lot to be gained there. There's a lot of research being done, a lot of percentages, a lot of numbers to be met. But also you have to keep in mind that a lot of those goals are also, let's call it fuzzy. So it's hard to put into numbers. It's the experience that people have. How are they experiencing that their work is easier? And are they more engaged? And are they more connected to their colleagues and to the company? So that's of course a big why. In the end, what we try to make the central part of the implementation is the fact that we make everything human-centric. So the humans, the people in the company are central instead of the company itself. And if people are in the center, and a really simple example is if they have the feeling that they're being heard, or that they're contributing to the company, and their ideas are being heard, then of course they're more happy. And happier people, we all know what that means. So people who care, people who are engaged and are connected, and have an emotional relationship to their work, are likely to be more productive. So the goal is to make people more happy, make people feel more at home at their work, or make them feel connected. the result can be one of these. So because it's if you like your job, you're more likely to do a better job, of course. You will also always have people that are actively disengaging and actively, well, just do their 9 to 5 routine and don't bother me, don't ask me anything, and just send me my paycheck. But how rewarding or how satisfying can that be? So, of course, it's a challenge, and one of the things that we talked about earlier is where do I get my information? Do I get it from a trusted source? How do I know people that are trusted sources? How can I recognize that those individuals within my company that are the experts? If I have only 150 people in my network, there's so much other experts out there. How can I find them? So badging is one of the options that that a lot of social business software vendors are delivering. And it also goes to the sense of belonging. So if I achieve something, if I get rewarded for achieving something, lots of good examples on different websites that actually show this. You're all agreeing so far? All with me? Yeah? All right. So it can be hard, of course, to make your business more social. It's not an easy thing. It's a lot of feeling, a lot of emotion, a lot of just gut feeling with people associated with this. So it's kind of hard to put this all in line. But here are some of the keywords that are related to this. So it's about bringing people together, connecting people to each other, and connecting people to knowledge. So we'll skip that. Right. If you want to start using this, so the why, you have to build your strategy first, of course. There have to be clear business goals, as we just saw a little bit of recap what we saw before. Business goals, the way we define them is that's really up to you, but we've seen that they're quite important. Requires change in the way that people work. One really crucial thing is, of course, executive sponsoring. We've seen that in a lot of different sessions as well. If we are doing this from the bottom up and people are demanding this, but it's not being followed up by executive sponsoring, then chances are it's going to diminish, it's going to fail. The other big pillar is, of course, the people. People need to adopt this new way of working, because if no one's going to use it, or if it doesn't help people, they won't adopt it, so they won't be using these new tools. And there's only so many chances for doing it right. So adoption is largely dependent on finding your champions, finding your heroes within the organization, helping them to build their reputation, and those are the people that can help drive the adoption for the rest of the organization. I see you got one more slide on what it could do for organizations. So this, of course, is kind of fluffy goals, fluffy results, increased speed of access to knowledge, or increased speed of access to experts. How much, they don't figure how much speed they're gaining, but still some of the percentages here. Let's have a short look at how SharePoint is doing this and what it does bring and what it sort of falls short of. We don't have much time for a demo, but just a quick attempt of having a look at what SharePoint is doing here. Then I probably should be on my screen here. So I created this SharePoint Evo community. The community template, who hasn't seen this community template in SharePoint 2013? So you can build a new website, new template is available, and that's a community template which by default has an activity stream and also allows you to have these discussions within the SharePoint environment. So it's basically the discussion board on steroids. What happens is people can ask questions but also post updates, and people can reply, people can have discussions on different topics. So what employees can do is follow this community so that they are being updated to about whatever happens in the community. So this is the place for people to share their information. People can reply, can create new discussions, ask questions. So this is the basic functionality. And you can have conversations happening here. When questions are being asked, obviously the goal is for other people to respond to that question. And that's where we get to the reputation settings, because if people answer questions, then we can award them points for that, for answering. And then we can see the new, or let's call it the existing experts to bubble up to the top. Okay, so it seems we don't have any network here, or this is a Office 365 problem. Let's try it again. So while this is waiting, one of the things we talked about earlier is reputation, and I think that's one of the things that is kind of not really happening here in the current environment of the current version of SharePoint 2013. I'll get back to this one. A question: where would you go to look for experts in your company? What would be the reasonable place or scope if you want to find experts on, let's say, marketing? The intranet. Would you go to a specific site to look for any marketing people, or would you just go to a search box, or what would be the scope of your search?
Just be searching for marketing. And that would take you to the department or office that deals with it.
That would be the first way to go, yeah.
Org chart.
Sorry?
Org chart.
The organization chart, that would be a good way to look, yeah.
The directory and then the marketing.
So that's, if you're talking about the organization chart or about the directory, that's more of a global scope, right? So I don't want to go to the marketing community to find marketing experts. Probably they are there, but it could be that someone is very, very knowledgeable about marketing or any other subject in a completely different community. What I'm trying to say here is that badges and reputation settings in SharePoint 2013 are community-based. So I build a reputation within a community. If I have something to say about some subject, and I earn points for instance, being active or answering questions, this, my reputation will build within that community. So possibly I could have two different reputations about the same subject in two different communities. Not sure if that makes sense. Because if I'm looking for someone that knows something about jazz, for instance, I wouldn't go into the marketing, but I would just search globally. So the concept of reputation is scoped to the community and not to the my entire organization, which is where I would expect it to be. The reason for that, of course, is Microsoft has to build SharePoint as scalable and as fast as possible, as performant as possible. So it has to be enabled for the cloud, and that's where the technical arguments are. So that's why it's being built that way. It's scalable and it's got a lot of performance, but information is stored in a specific community. And I think even with the 90-day upgrades or updates that Microsoft has planned to do, I don't think this is going to be changed over the next couple of years. Maybe in a new release, SharePoint 2016 maybe, that could be a new release for that. But in the meantime, I think this is what's happening. So that's one of the things where I say, well, I'm not sure if that makes sense. Another thing is what can happen is people can respond to questions, of course, and if I actually respond to this, so let's just assume that this is a really smart answer to a difficult business question, but okay, and I'll leave a reply. What happens is, in the background is SharePoint is talking to the mail server, Exchange in this situation, which is also part of Office 365, and sends me an update, sends me a notification of the fact that someone replied to my question or replied to my post here. We talked about enabling people to participate in the conversation continually, so that's one of the premises. What happens is if I get this email, and this is another thing that where I have to say, I'm not sure if this makes sense. This is what happens. So someone asks a question, I get an email notification. Suppose I'm on the road and I'm able to answer this question. So what happens is if I reply to this, at least the good thing is I can actually see the answer in the email. So I don't have to go back to the activity stream to see exactly what happened, which was there in a previous version. But what happens if I reply here, so replying to this email, my reply will never go back to the activity stream in the community. So what I've done essentially is expand the communication from the community back out to email. And this is where the conversation will continue. So we started it out as a really nice open conversation where everyone in the community can actually engage in. But once we start including email, we go back into our mailbox. I'm not sure if that makes sense either. So that's something you have to think about if you want to start using this technology. One of the other things also around communities and about communication here, there was one other point I wanted to point out, but I totally forgot, so I'll get back to that. Almost springs to mind.
Can the emails be stopped?
Sorry?
Can the email updates be stopped? People have personal settings. Turn those
You can turn off notification.
just like alerts, is it? Just works in that same.
That's true, yeah. You can, but imagine what happens if people are on the road. So some people, they just live in email, so they won't go without email. If you say to them, we have this new solution for you, but you can't use email anymore, then they're off board. So if that's an option, okay. We have, of course, the mobile client, which also allows you to interact with the newsfeed in a more mobile way, but still, you will lose some people in email. So that's I don't think it's completely thought through. That's maybe the message. Another thing is, to point that out, is the fact that whatever happens in a community should also be brought back to my personal newsfeed. So a user has a personal newsfeed, and whatever sites they are following, we get a sort of update, a sort of roll up what's happening in all the communities that are being created. That seems like a nice feature, but what you actually need to do is not only follow the community that you are interested in, but also follow the people that are in that community. So I will only get updates here if I actually follow the person that posted to the community. So if I'm not following, Charlie is following Chet, but if he's not following Dizzy and Dizzy is posting something in that community, how will I know? So that's something, those are some of the things that SharePoint really makes a good attempt, but it's not there yet. So that's something to keep in mind. Can you tell I like jazz? Just a little bit. All right, so I'll back to the slides. Any questions so far? So let's look at the how just a little bit. Suppose you start being convinced of social networking, social business is something that you'd like to do. What can we do? How would you approach this? What would be the best way? So, of course, it all starts with setting it up technically. That's something that you have to think about. But there's more than technology, of course. Technology has to be enabled. You have to enable people to use the technology, and technology has to be ready. So your SharePoint environment has to facilitate all this. But also, we have to engage the people. And if we're talking about people engagement, then the magic word, of course, is adoption. and adoption doesn't happen without people. And also it doesn't happen without being aligned with your business goals. So bringing all those three together, that's where social is really happening. So it's part of technology, it's part of the way people work, and it's a part of what the business is looking for. So you could draw this into, or break it up into a couple of areas here. You don't have to use all of them, but there are some topics here that might be very useful in starting to implement a social business solution, whether it's SharePoint out of the box or a tool that any of the other vendors are selling. I think the more integrated the solution is, the better it is. Instead of having two separate silos, like for instance, Yammer has some integration with SharePoint, but SharePoint is the one silo and Yammer is the other silo, in my opinion. The more integrated it is, the more beneficial it can be. So these are some of the topics that I would encourage you to look at when you start implementing social business. Why? Why is this important? Because it doesn't do it by itself. Social has to be encouraged and also has to be supported by senior management. So 80% of the efforts will not succeed because there's no leadership, there's no executive buy-in. And if the executives actually set the example, and if people see that the executives are on board, that's where the magic happens. One of my customers told me that they were trying to get people to fill in their profile in my sites, which can be a challenge, of course. There's a lot of creative ways to have people, to encourage people filling their profiles. But once, so they had their CEO fill in his profile, and they communicated this. When this happened, within 1 week, they had 90% of people actually also do the same. So he set the example. It's just a really small example, but still, it's encouraging people to be on board and to actually go along with it. So a quote from Gardner explaining that we have to have a top-down approach. At least the C-level executive have to be on board for this. All right, so how do we do this? We set our goals. That's the most important one. So you can have a lot of different goals. One of the goals could be less email, but that's more of a way to do it. A goal could be we want to be able to go to market in 25% less time, or well, we've seen the goals before. Second one is to get the executive leadership, so everyone has to be on board. It has to be something that is going through all the layers of the organization. Then encourage people, train people, get the community going. One of the 10 tenets said you have to have a sort of critical mass. A community of 2 people it's not really a lot going on there. So we have to have a critical mass for this to work, which is why it of course happens or works better in larger organizations. And then measuring. So we have to have a baseline, we have to have specific goals we want to go for, but then measuring. If you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what you want to reach, and if there's no way you can tell you're actually doing this or are being more social, then it's not really very helpful. So one of the things we used with one of my customers was use this Kotter model, which uses a sort of 8-step program into changing organizations. And then we plotted the couple of storylines here, so culture, business, functional, and technology. And talked to the company and said, okay, in which stage of this changing program or changing process will we see more emphasis on one of these storylines? So it made people aware of we have to focus on technology in the beginning more, making sure everything works, making sure it's installed right, making sure everything is in the right place. And then when we get further down the line during the process, then technology gets a little less important. So that's one of the things that helped. Another thing we did was look at cultural aspects within an organization. This is the conflicting values model, conflicting values framework, and it gives you a really good insight in what your organization is like. What sort of organization are you, and how are people working? So are we for instance, market-driven, and do we have to compete with other companies, then probably we need to have a lot of speed in our organization. So a lot of innovation, short-term idea campaigns, for instance. But if we're more of a controlled hierarchy, maybe an organization in the government, their way of working is so much different. So this is very helpful in finding out what sort of organization are you and where should we put the emphasis. So after we've done this, we can actually start to roll it out. One of the discussions we usually have with customers is, should we do this big bang or should we do this in a sort of test environment? So would this work actually? What do you think? If you start rolling out social business software, should you do it in a sort of proof of concept test pilot environment? Or is it something you just roll out to the entire organization?
Roll it out and go for it.
Go for it. Yeah. If you're convinced about it, why not do it? Yeah. That's a bold move. But still, we all agree?
No, so we rolled out Yammer. So
Yeah.
a small community of about, well, it started off with very little communication, and then the viral approach just snowballed at about 7,000 users so far.
Right.
We'll already get globally 70,000.
Yeah. The thing is, so 7,000 users out of how many?
70,000.
Okay, so it's 10%. The thing is, the way you treat those first 10%, are they the test group, the guinea pigs, or are they the early adopters? And that makes a big difference. So if you are assuming that they are the front soldiers and they are also the advocates maybe later on, and you're assuming that the rest will follow, or it's planned that the rest will follow, I think that's a good approach. And that's almost the same as doing it big bang, because we're assuming that everyone's going to use this technology. If you are doing it in a secluded area, where actually maybe there is value being created, information, knowledge being created, and then you have to transfer that to your production environment, that might be a challenge in itself. So treating them as the test group, not sure if that's the best approach. But it requires some planning and also a lot of positive communication about this. So I got a few more slides, we're almost there. 4 more minutes. So a top 5 of things that work in setting up this sort of pilot. It's not about the technology, of course, but if you don't do the technology right and it doesn't work for them, doesn't work for the users, then they will leave it alone. So that's very important. So we have to incorporate this into our existing information architecture, manage metadata, that kind of stuff. So it has to work from a technical perspective. If it doesn't work that way, then people will just lose interest. It has to be delivering value. So people will ask themselves, what's in it for me? How does this help my daily job? So it has to bring value to them, enabling them in their scenarios and in their use cases. So that's a big one as well. People have to be helped and educated. So we have to give them resources where they can find the information about how this new way of working works, or how do the tools work, or so that's the ongoing process. Right, so you can read this for yourself. This is one of the things that we do in terms of education. Communication is very important, and broadcasting your success stories might encourage, or will actually encourage, people to come on board for this as well. So communication is super important here. One of the things that one of our customers did was a scavenger hunt. So they hid some of the assets that people were able to use somewhere in their internet. So that's using the internet or using the new tools to find information. Another example was a company that had an idea market. So people were split up in groups and they were creating ideas, and they were rewarded for the ideas. So the one group was supposed to create ideas, and they were rewarded for the quality of the ideas. The other group was rewarded for how sellable and how findable their ideas were. So there was a sort of competition going on, but still the end result was people were learning how to create idea campaigns and drive innovation through this these social media. So there's a lot of creative ideas. And the last one. So what do you think is the most important one in building social and building communities? What would be top one? What's our number one here?
Out of these,
Out of
out of this selection,
no. What could be the next in driving social business software, social let's say community way of communicating?
just momentum is maintaining the momentum.
Momentum is important. Keeping that momentum, keeping it going. I think it's crucial that you have a plan around how your communities are being built and maintained. So the community managers, some companies call them community gardeners or community shepherds, whatever you want to call it, but the word says a lot. Community managers are crucial. So these are the evangelists or the people that help your colleagues in engaging in the community. So this is absolutely crucial. You have to have a plan for maintaining those communities, setting the new communities up. Also a plan for what do we do with communities that are not active anymore. So we have a sort of life cycle plan for this. And it could even be people being rewarded for actively running a community. So there could be a performance review effect to this. And then the last one is, of course, measure your success. So qualitative measuring. So that would be the anecdotal evidence. How has it helped me? And of course, the numbers and the figures are also important as well. So I'll run through this one really quick, so we can fill the screen. So to recap, it's absolutely not IT driven. If it starts from the IT perspective, IT department, it's destined to fail. I'm sorry to say, but that's what we've seen a lot of times. So everyone has to be engaged and have to be involved in this. It has to be value for the users, for the end users in there. Education is, of course, very important. Strategy is important for communication, and the community managers have a really important role. So just because SharePoint 2013 offers you a community and you can now use it, doesn't mean that it's going to automatically work. Or the fact that you can follow a document, people are actually going to follow a document. Because the technology is there, that doesn't mean that everyone knows exactly how to use it and it aligns to your business goals. So you have to think about the implications and plan this right. So that's the end of my slide deck, and